Welcome to Mimosa Sisterhood, a podcast that celebrates women. Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to the podcast. This is Melissa, and you are listening to Mimosa Sisterhood, and we are back for another episode of Drinkin' Booze and celebrating some badass babes from history. I know it's the end of February, but I was not going to finish out this month without celebrating two absolutely legendary women in Black history, because it is Black History Month, in case you didn't know. So I invited one of my super cool podcast friends, Lex. She is one of the co-hosts of the Peony, onto the show to tell some stories about two women that you may or may not know. To be honest, I didn't know either of the women that are covered in today's episode, so I learned a lot, I felt a lot, and I think you will too. Before we dive into it, I wanted to let you guys know that I brought my newsletter back from the dead. I had started my newsletter back in 2020 when your girl was like barely working and had no life responsibilities because the pandemic was in full swing and I had all of the time on my plate to do whatever the hell I wanted. And so I turned my newsletter into like a monthly magazine, which worked for about a year until life picked back up. And then I was like, oh, wait, I'm not a magazine writer. I'm a podcaster. So I had to put a pause on it for a couple of months, but we're back in action for 2022. And this time I'm coming at you with a real newsletter. You will not be receiving a magazine anymore. You're going to receive a much smaller bite-sized version of my old newsletter. And I might send more than one a month. So if you are currently signed up, I hope you've been enjoying the past couple newsletters I've sent through. I've got another really awesome one coming out today. Or if you're not signed up, you absolutely should, because my newsletters are totally awesome. They're going to include a lot of cool things like new episode announcements, book recommendations, Spotify playlists, like all kinds of fun stuff. So if you're interested, you can head to my website, mimosasisterhood.com, and sign up for the newsletter through the website. Or if you follow me on Instagram, head to the link in my bio and there's a super easy, quick newsletter sign up button. And you'll be on your way to receiving some pretty kick-ass emails, if I do say so myself. Also, I have a Facebook group now, and like not one of those lame Facebook pages that you just like and never look at again, an actual group that I'm trying to build into somewhat of a community. So if you'd like to be a part of that, go find us on Facebook. We're called Mimosa Sisterhood Podcast Community. Pretty straightforward. You can also access the link to that in my Instagram bio as well. Okay, guys, we have a super jam-packed episode today, and it's fucking amazing. Like, you are going to want to listen to every single second of this episode because there isn't a single sentence that isn't absolutely groundbreaking. So grab your alcoholic beverage and let's get into it. And quick warning, it's a heavy one. All right, I'll see you on the other side. Hi, Lex.
Hello, Melissa.
It's so cool to see us on the other side of the mic with you on my show.
I know. I'm so excited. I was like, I lost it when you reached out. I was like, oh, yes. So I'm really excited to be here and hanging with you, talking about badass ladies.
Hell yeah. So everybody out there listening, Lex is a co-host on another podcast called The Peony, and I was on that show. Gosh, I don't even know how long ago that was. I think it was a while ago.
I think it was last summer.
That makes sense.
Earlier. I don't know. Time is an illusion at this point. Like, I've
really
no idea, no concept of anything. But yeah, you were on our show, which The Peony is a podcast that's about having vulnerable conversations with creatives, which sounds really like emotional and heavy, but it's very off the rails and goofy. my co-host Julia and I will often ask people like, so like, what made you want to go into a creative field? And also, do you believe in aliens? And like, if you do, how will you be abducted? Like, two sides of the same coin, really.
Yes. I feel like she asked me some hilarious questions during that episode, and like I can't remember what they are now, but I feel like one of them might have been like, who do you want to like be eating brunch with? And
yes, it was. Yeah.
I don't remember who I said, but it was probably a great answer. So yeah, fantastic conversation.
It's so fun. It's so goofy. We had such a good time together. So I'm pumped to be hanging out again.
Well, so the coolest part, which I think the world should know, is like the strange way that I connected with you guys, which was through the platform Girl Boss.
Yep.
Like, I've talked about Girl Boss in the past on different episodes, but I know like people today hate the term girl boss, and I totally get it, but we have to give a shout out to, what was her name? Sophia? Who's the originator of Girl Boss?
I think so. I know.
Yeah, Sophia, I can never say her last name. Amoruso. Sophia Amoruso. She was the woman that coined the term girl boss, but she originally started with Nasty Girl, which was her like vintage business that she created by herself at like, I don't know, 20 years old while getting shit-faced and doing drugs in San Francisco, which was literally what I was doing at the same age. But instead of launching my own vintage business that led me to become a multimillionaire, I was just hanging out in Hippie Hill and doing nothing. So she started Nasty Gal, went on to launch Girl Boss, and now has like another business, a brand new business. But Girl Boss right now is like this online digital platform community where people like myself can make an account and you can like network with other women. And I think it's a great resource. Like, I think like if anybody out there is looking for something like a networking opportunity, it's so good because they have like job opportunities on there, a podcast section where you can find guests for your show, which is how I connected with Julia. There's just like so much you could be doing there that if you aren't on the platform, I highly suggest getting on it, because it's just, you can meet a lot of people and make a lot of connections, and there really isn't anywhere else that you can do that. Like like no one's on Facebook like awkwardly DMing each other, it's like it's meant to connect. So you aren't like the weirdo if you reach out to another girl,
Yeah. It's also nice too, because I think like, sure, you can network and meet people on LinkedIn, but I think, at least my experience with LinkedIn has been, it's either very formal or like, well, it's always very formal, but then sometimes it's very passive aggressive. It's just like a weird vibe. Versus like Girl Boss is, I haven't used it, but Julia is like, she's great at finding guests. And now I'm like, I need to go sign up after this. But we've found so many guests through Girl Boss and are like still very much connected to them, still talk, like have people back on the show, are friends with them. It's so dope. It's just really easy to meet like-minded people from our experience. So
yeah,
big fan.
Check it out, everybody out there. It's really cool. And I should probably do an episode on Sophia because she is an icon.
Do it.
Well, yay. We're here. Yeah. We're talking about women in history. This is going to be our we're celebrating Black History today on the show, and we both have two awesome women from different time periods. So excited to see how those stories intersect. I'm sure they will. But what are you drinking?
I am drinking a Moscow Mule.
I love a good Moscow Mule.
It's my go-to. That and really any vodka-based drink. I'm like vodka tonic, Moscow Mule. Yep. Keep it coming.
What kind of vodka are you drinking?
It's called Ghost Coast, which I had never heard of, but a friend of mine went to Savannah, Georgia for work and was like, can I bring anybody anything back? And I made a joke. I was like, yeah, bring me some ghosts. Like, I would love to be haunted. That would be great. And so he responded. He was like, so all of the ghosts of the coast wanted to come back with me as like a hint.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, ha ha ha, great. Like, that'll be fun. And then last night, when we were hanging out for game night, he gave me the gift, and it was a bottle of Ghost Coast vodka. And I think it's distilled in Savannah, Georgia. It's very nice. So I'm having a good time.
Hell yeah. That's so cool. And like, I also have been to Savannah once, and I freaking loved it.
I've never been. I want to go so badly.
It was scorching hot, which was the worst thing ever. And it was October, which is like, why am I like burning in hell in October? Like, this is not good. And it wasn't like hot, like we're in LA and the sun's beaming down. It's like sticky and sweaty and like wet.
Yeah, the humidity. I don't know how y'all do it. Like, if you live in Florida or what, I'm also in LA, so anytime it's like humidity 70%, I'm like, no, I'm gonna die. And then there are people who like, there's one time I was in Florida and it was like 95 degrees, 100% humidity, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, I could never. So East Coasters are made of stronger stuff. I can't.
Nope. It's one of the reasons why I know I could never live in the South at all. But it was so beautiful. And they have all those, like, I think they're like weeping willow trees, or I don't know if they are, but like those trees with the hanging moss.
Yeah.
They're
with the
so
Spanish
beautiful.
moss.
Oh,
so pretty.
it's just so gorgeous. It's just like so much history there. Like a lot of bad history, but like also just like you can feel it in your soul when you're walking around, because you just know that like you're in a really like lots of shit's happened here, and you can just like feel it through your veins. It's like very powerful.
Yeah, that's how I felt the first time I went to London. I felt like I could feel the history like coming up and trying to grab me. It was cool and also very spooky.
Yes,
so
spooky for
the
sure.
East Coast very much has that. East Coast and the South has that feeling where you're just like, oh, I'm in danger. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, just the Spanish moss in general, it's eerie, it's spooky, it's beautiful, but it's like haunted. Like, you know, like you're kind of like, there are spirits in these like trees.
Yeah. There's just ghosts in this moss.
Oh my God. Well, hell yeah. I'm so stoked on this vodka.
Very good.
Pouring one out to the ghosts today.
Yeah. Having a spirit for the spirits.
Love it.
What are you drinking?
I am drinking something way less cool. I am so last minute on it. I like ran to CVS earlier and was like, oh my God, I have no alcohol in the house. What's going on? And I got a bottle of wine, and I always try to like pair my alcohol with my lady. And so I'm like trying to like make a connection here, and nothing's clicking. So I'm like, well, that's out of the picture.
Maybe we'll find something along the way.
Yeah. I don't know if this is really the wine for my woman tonight, but it caught my eye because it's called Mind and Body. And I was like cracking up because I'm like, yeah, I mean, wine really helps my mind. Like, if I'm having a bad day or I'm stressed, like, I am absolutely pouring a glass of wine and hitting the bathtub, and like all my sorrows have gone away. So like that makes sense. And then I'm like, what about the body? Like, isn't alcohol bad for you? And then I looked in closer, and it says premium low calorie wine. And I'm like, oh, no. Okay, so I can get drunk guilt free. I see. And at first I was like, that's lame. And then I was like, I'm going to try it, because I don't think I've ever had a low calorie wine before. It looks like a yogi, like, curated this. Like, it literally looks like this would be like the Instagram photo of like somebody's yoga company, you know?
It looks like you went to Santa Monica and just like peeled off like a welcome sign. At one of those, like, we serve bone broth and kale, and that's it.
Yes.
Slapped it on a bottle.
I should be covering like Gwyneth Paltrow tonight with this bottle of wine. You know what I mean? All it needs is a vaginal crystal to go alongside of it.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. So I was like, all right, well, we're doing it. And like my first sip was like, I made like a face. I almost wish I got it on like so that you could see it. It's like a little sour.
Okay.
But then I kept drinking it, and I'm like, oh, this is actually really good. And I can tell that there is like low sugar or like no sugar, because I've drinking half the bottle and I'm not buzzed. So I'm like, well, either it's coming like within seconds, like I'm about to be fucked, Or I think this is almost what everybody wants, where they can drink a whole bottle of wine and not be hungover because there's no sugar.
What's the alcohol volume on it?
Let's see. 8.5.
Okay, so that's not nothing. That's like a good beer. All right.
Yeah, it's like a brewery beer. Not like a Coors Light, but like maybe a good Pilsner.
Yeah, I know a lot of
road.
people, like if it's a red wine, will feel it a lot more than if it's a white. And because that's a white wine, right?
Yes. This is, it's a Pinot Grigio.
Yeah, because I know even like I love red wine, but sometimes if it's a little too full bodied or too many tannins or whatever, I don't know these words. I just repeat them back a parrot.
Me too.
But sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm having a nice time. Okay. But I know red wine will like give people headaches more. So
I mean, I'm usually pretty good in general, but I'm interested. Like, I'm interested. I'll like report back tomorrow and be like, I feel like shit, or like, I actually feel great and I'm going to buy a case, you know, like I'll let you know. But yeah, this is some low calorie mind body wine. Wow. I mean, if it is what it says it is, then I'll support it, because if it helps my mind and body, I'm all in.
Well, why not?
All right. Well,
become one.
Cheers. Cheers to tonight. Cheers to drinks. Cheers to our women.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Okay. Well, we decided earlier that I'm going to go first because my woman came first in life. So it'd be kind of cool to watch that like progression of women's stories, or at least their experience as Black women living in the world. I was going to say America, but then I was like, I don't know if your woman's American. So
she is American.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to cover a lady from old Hollywood era. And I had actually never heard of her before. So she is brand new to me. And I will just preface by saying, like, when I like read a brief description of her story, I was like, oh, this is so great. Like, yes, she's going to be perfect. I love this. So good. So empowering. And like, then when I got like deeper into her story, I was like, oh my God, this is so fucking tragic.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it gets tragic and it's sad and that sucks. But she still is an absolute icon, and the fact that I don't know who she is concerning. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to just tell her story. And if you've never heard of her, well, here's Dorothy Dandridge.
Okay, so I have heard of her. This is not who I thought you were covering, though. But
did you think I was covering Billie Holiday?
I initially thought that. I thought you were going to cover, and I realized, I was like, maybe she's already covered her. Eartha Kitt is who I thought you were going to cover.
No, I was first going to cover Billie Holiday, and then I was like, I'm going to cover Dorothy Dandridge.
Yeah. Billie's story is... Okay, I'm excited. I'm so excited to learn about Dorothy, because I've heard her name, but I don't know if I'm familiar with her work or not, so I'm really excited to learn about her.
Yeah, she, and like I'm saying, and you'll hear more later in her story, but I mean, she was right alongside so many other old Hollywood actresses that we hear and know about all the time today. Mm-hmm. So I was like really surprised that I'd never seen this name before, but I guess also not that surprised, because that's just the reality of the world that we live in. Yeah. So to summarize her story briefly, she was an old Hollywood actress. She was also a singer, but she's credited and famous for being the very first African-American person to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. She was the first. It never happened before. So she became the first of the first, and allowed kind of this like pathway for other people to kind of follow in her footsteps. So to tell you a little bit about her story, she was born on November 9th, 1922 in Cleveland, Ohio. Her mother was Ruby Dandridge, who was an actress, and her father was Cyril Dandridge. He was a Baptist minister. And her parents had a lot of problems in their relationship, to the point that Ruby's mom actually ended up leaving the dad during pregnancy. So by the time Dorothy was born, like, she never knew her dad at all. And I think part of the reason why Ruby left Cyril was because she had a lover on the side.
Oh.
And not just any lover, a female lover.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Her lover's name was Geneva Williams, and this woman was a real bitch. I know that's harsh, but she was literally like an evil stepmother.
Oh, no.
She was not a good woman.
Ugh.
Yeah. And so just,
Yeah.
already off to a rough start. So at a very early age, Ruby's mom pushed her two daughters, Dorothy and Vivian. So there was Dorothy had a sister named Vivian. She kind of like pushed them straight into show business and had them performing together as sisters in a song and dance group that they called the Wonder Children. So she literally had them like in show business really young. Like they were like the original child stars, probably like along with like Shirley Temple, like that age. And their act, the Wonder Children, was managed by none other than Ruby's lover, Geneva, who I already told you was a real bitch.
Yeah. Oh, no.
So it's reported that she had a really bad temper and she used to like very like cruelly discipline the children. So the two sisters toured the South together for 5 years. And they performed in black churches primarily, was like where they were performing. And they rarely attended school because they were in a dance and singing group together as young children, performing for 5 years. And at the same time, their mom, Ruby, was also still acting and performing home in Cleveland, which means Geneva must have been taking the girls all around the South doing this like song and dance gig and like also being their like pretend mom / band manager / evil stepmom. So not really what you'd imagine for like a young child's growth and development.
Yeah. Not great.
Not great. And then the Great Depression hit. And so work ended, gigs ended, performing ended, and their like little band thing they had going on was like over. Like they weren't getting hired to do shows anymore or like getting invited to do things because it was literally the Great Depression. So their mom Ruby moved the whole family. I don't know if the evil stepmom came. I like actually never heard about her again after this. So who knows what happened to her, but they all moved to Hollywood, California around the 1930s, and their mother found steady work in radio, and she also got a couple of smaller acting gigs, primarily only playing the roles of domestic servants because that was all that was available to black actresses during the time. But I guess the good thing about this move and the fact that it was the Great Depression was that Dorothy started going to school because she wasn't working as a child. And so she attended McKinley Junior High School, which I don't know myself, but I am imagining is somewhere in Hollywood. And so in 1934, the Wonder Children, which was the name of her and her sister's little group, they renamed themselves to the Dandridge Sisters, and then they added on a third, which was a girl named Etta Jones, who was one of their like dance schoolmates. And the three of them went around and performed together. And Dorothy was 12 years old at this time, so still very young.
Yeah.
And the group was a hit. They landed gigs at all kinds of famous places. They performed at the Cotton Club in Harlem. They performed with like top acts that were, you know, booming at the time. And as an African-American singer in the 30s, she obviously was confronted with segregation and racism very early on in her life and within the entertainment industry. So even though she was allowed on stage and in some venues, she wasn't allowed to eat at the venue restaurants or allowed to use certain facilities within the venue. I imagine like probably the bathroom or whatever other facilities they had because of her skin color. So very strange to be like invited to be a performer, but be like, you can't go here or there though.
Yeah. That happened a lot to Sister Rosetta Tharpe.
Yes,
She's Listeners, Google Godmother of Rock and Roll. You will get her.
We covered her with Dolly Parton a long ass time ago. But yeah, an iconic, I think, I don't remember what we called it, but I'll tag it in the episode notes. You guys should listen to it.
She was just so badass. But that happened a lot. I think she also performed at the Cotton Club as well in Harlem. And same thing. Like, you're allowed to be on stage, but that's it. That's all you get.
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah, really fucked up. So as a teenager, she started landing small roles in a number of different films. So her first on-screen performance was in a small comedy short called Our Gang. And then she got a part within the Dandridge sisters, like as a group. They appeared in the big broadcast of 1936 with Bill Bojangles Robinson. Mm-hmm. And then they did A Day at the Races with the Marx Brothers. And then they did It Can't Last Forever with the Jackson Brothers. So They were in entertainment. Like, they were doing
deep
well.
In it, yeah.
For being, like, in high school also. Like, they were in a good spot. And, like, although these appearances were pretty minor, it did start to gain Dorothy recognition throughout, like, the nightclub performance scene. Which is so ironic because she was, like, 14 or something in the nightclub performance scene. Yeah. So her first credited role was in 1940, and it was a film called Four Shall Die. And in this film, she was cast as a murderer. It was a horror film, and she was a murderer. And it did very little for her career. Because at this time, which I'd like kind of already mentioned earlier, Black actresses were basically only cast in roles of like the maid. Or men were cast as, like, the butler. That was, like, all that they were getting. And she basically refused to accept a role that was, like, stereotypical in that way. Yep. So in order for her to get a, like, non-racially stereotypical role, she had to, like, take these, like, shitty side jobs and, like, be the murderer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she kind of got into film doing bad roles for like movies that no one watched or ever heard of, and it didn't really bring her the admiration or respect because no one was watching them, and it wasn't good. But aside from her film appearances during this time, she got into something I'd never heard of before until reading this. She was appearing in like what they called soundies. And it, from my understanding, it's like short film clips that were displayed on a jukebox. Have you heard of these? You know these?
Oh, I was like, yeah, it's called talkies. And I was like, no, soundies. I actually don't know if I've heard this. I've seen, and I don't know if this is the same thing, but like I've seen, it's like, it looks like a jukebox and then you select the film that you want to watch and you like crank it.
That's what it was.
But okay, but I've seen it not with sound. I've seen it just as like it's almost like a flip book.
I think that's what it was. I mean, what I read just said jukebox, so I'm thinking like a music jukebox and like what there's like a video in there. I don't understand. But then I Googled it because I was like, I want to know what this is. And I found a bunch of YouTube videos of the film. And it seems like it's more along the lines of what you described.
I think so. If you're ever at Disneyland, if you go on Main Street, there's I think it says it's an arcade, but it's like the candy shop. There's the like palm reader that you can stick $1 in and it'll give you. There's that, but on the sides there are these. They I'm thinking that this is what it is. It's like those big jukebox, and you crank it.
I know what you're talking about.
Yep, and you can watch. I think they're all Charlie Chaplin like shorts.
Yes. Oh my god.
So I feel like it's probably like that.
It is like that. Okay, because this whole time I like couldn't visualize it in my head, but now I know exactly what you're talking about because I've looked at those at Disneyland.
There we go.
That's it.
Yeah, but I guess maybe you select the one you want to watch instead, or maybe it's just one.
No, she did tons of them, and you can literally watch them on YouTube right now. They're all on the internet. And so basically, like, these films showed her talent as a singer because she sang in them. As a dancer, she was dancing in them. And as an actor, because sometimes she'd play like different roles in like her singing and whatever she was doing. But to describe these videos, because I was like, I need to see what this is. They were short black and white films. And they, from the ones that I watched, I didn't watch every one of them. I just kind of browsed through quickly. But it reminded me of like a scene from a Wild Wild West bar where it like featured a man like jamming out on the piano. And then she was like standing in front of him, like singing and dancing. And then like around her are like flappers and like bar people. And they're like sitting on each other's laps and like cozying up. It like reminded me of scene of what is that, Westworld? Have you ever see that show?
I haven't seen Westworld.
Okay, it was like that.
Do you remember hit clips from like our middle school years? Okay, this is giving me like hit clips vibes, but for like 30s and 40s.
Yes. 100%.
Like you get a snippet of the thing, and that's all you get.
Literally a snippet. Is it like a tiny little drive or something?
I can't believe we thought those were the future. Like,
embarrassing.
So bad.
That's gonna be like on eBay right now as like a vintage item.
Oh Lord. Whew.
So later in the 1940s, while she was doing a gig at the Cotton Club, she met a handsome dancer and entertainer. He was a tap dancer, I believe, and his name was Harold Nicholas. And they hit it off immediately and basically like went straight to the wedding ceremony and were like married within days, I think. Like,
wow,
maybe not like days, but like it was instantaneous.
Okay, it was like a Disney situation. Like, we've known each other 3 days. This is a done deal.
Rom-com style. Yeah, and it was a horrible idea.
Oh no.
Newsflash, bad idea. Those things usually never really pan out, by the way.
Yeah,
so yeah, he was a nightmare, and basically word on the street was that he liked to chase around other women. So untrustworthy, a slime ball, a cheater, all of the things.
Our favorite adverbs.
Yes, and she got pregnant and gave birth to her only child that she ever ended up having. And her child's name was Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas. And her child was born on September 2nd, 1943. This is where things get not good.
Uh-oh.
So while she was in labor, Harold took off to go golf and basically like left her stranded at the home without a car. I mean, I don't think she was like, I'm in labor and he was like sick, I'm gonna go golf right now. I think it was like she was, probably like 9 months pregnant, exploding at the seams, and he was just like out living his best life. Like, his wife wasn't about to be in labor any second, any day. So while he was out doing his thing, she went into labor and had no way to like get to the hospital. And eventually she did make it to the hospital, but the delay of getting there delayed the birth, and they ended up having to use, which I don't know what this is, forceps.
Yep.
I don't know what that is.
They are so forceps are like, they're like these big clamps. I'm trying to if you've ever had an IUD inserted or removed, the tool that they'll usually use to like put that in or remove the IUD is what a forcep is. I'm trying to think of it like tongs, like if tongs and scissors had a baby.
Oh God.
But so what it'll do is like
Yeah.
reach into the vaginal canal and help pull the baby out. But a lot of times they would do it around the skull, and it can, I'm assuming this is probably what likely happened, but a lot of times babies who are born with that may be hard of hearing or may have damage to their hearing or their eyesight or something, because it's not good. It's not a good way to deliver babies.
So why wouldn't they just do a C-section? Was that not a thing?
It may not have been, or it may have been like, it could have been, I don't know, because I've had family members and I know a few friends who were delivered using forceps.
Really?
I don't know if it's like, if the baby, a situation like the baby needs to come out now because the oxygen deprivation, or if the umbilical cord's around the neck, maybe they're like, we just got to get the baby out as fast as we can, and we don't have time to like
do all that.
Do a C-section, yeah.
Yes. I quickly looked it up. C-sections have been a thing since 1610, which is very concerning.
Well, there you go.
But the modern C-section emerged around the 1940s, which was still before this time period. So yeah, they probably just didn't have enough time to do that. Yeah. So this procedure that they did left their child with brain damage. Yep. And it was a lifelong situation that required 24/7 care. And Dorothy blamed herself for this. Yeah. Like, she was mortified that this happened, and she thought it was her fault because she couldn't get to the hospital in time to have like a regular birth. So she kind of like carried the weight of that for her entire life. And her child was so horribly brain damaged that she was unable to speak and had no recollection of Dorothy even being her mom.
Oh, God.
Really horrible. Absolutely horrible. So during this time, Dorothy like gave up performing. Yeah. Totally understand. And she just was like trying to get her life together and figure out her shitty husband and take care of her daughter and just like probably dealing with a lot of grief and like trauma from the entire incident. And so she ends up divorcing that piece of shit husband in 1951 and then got back to work. And her first role was playing, I'm going to butcher this, Mulmendi, Queen of the Ashuba, in a Tarzan film. Where she received a ton of attention for wearing what was considered provocative clothing.
It's probably like a swimsuit or something.
Yeah, right? Yeah, they were very alarmed by her provocative outfit.
Oh my God, she has legs!
Right? But the publicity around her outfit ended up getting her kind of like the good visibility that she needed for her career. And then she also returned back to the nightclub scene, but this time she was performing as like a solo singer, and she was a huge hit. In fact, super funny, she ended up getting a 1-week gig at the Macombo Club in Hollywood, which was basically operated by Desi Arnaz, which was Lucille Ball's husband.
What?
Yeah, I just talked about him in my last episode. Lots of thoughts on Desi Arnaz. If you're interested in hearing them, listen to the last episode. But yeah, he was a musician, and he was at this club and, you know, was the big thing. And she basically had like a 1 week, she was like opening for him, I think, for a week. So that got her a lot of recognition. And then she ended up selling out a 14-week gig at a club called La Vie en Rose. So things were just like really starting to boom for her. And then after all of this, she basically was like on her way to becoming an international star. And she started performing at venues all over the world: London, Rio de Janeiro, San Francisco, New York, and was just like getting out there. So she's like, the career is moving, things are happening for her. And then she lands her very first like starring film role. It's 1953. She's got her first big acting gig. And she's in a film called Bright Road, where she plays this like earnest young school teacher. And she's like acting alongside Harry Belafonte. And it was like a big hit. Like, it wasn't like booming, but it was really good for her and her career. And it's really what led to her landing her next gig, which like changed her life. So her next role was, she basically landed the leading role in an all-black musical film adaptation of Oscar Hammerstein II's 1943 Broadway musical Carmen Jones.
Oh, okay. This is why I know this name.
So I was like reading more about this, and I'm like, what opera is this? And I do a quick Google search, and I'm like, oh, that one. And I like kept it up so I could like remember the jingle. You know, I don't know if I'm gonna get like killed for having this on the internet. Spotify or somebody's gonna come and like strip it from the internet. But like that opera, like I've never seen this in my life, but like I know that sound.
Yeah, yes. That's one of those like pop cultural references that just you're born and it's just there in your brain somewhere.
Right? I'm like, oh, I know that. How funny. They did an all black version of it. Like, okay, cool. So they did, and she had the leading role in the act, and the adaptation took place in a World War II era within an African-American setting. She was, even though during this time she was a singer herself, like she had just been doing solo gigs and stuff, she didn't really have like an opera voice, so they kind of had to like bring in somebody else named Marilyn Horne, who ended up doing the vocals, and so they just like dubbed it over. Carmen Jones opened like strong at the box office on October 28th, 1954, earning $70,000 during its first week, $50,000 during its second. And it was just like the talk of the town, and she was the leading woman in the role doing the opera song that I just butchered and said. And you can also watch it on YouTube, which is really cool. So her performance as this like seductive leading actress woman made her one of Hollywood's first African-American sex symbols. And the reviews of her in that film were just all 100% positive. Like everybody was stoked off of her. And so following this fame, she became the first Black woman to ever be featured on the cover of Life, and that like Life magazine, and that took place November 1st, 1954. And at the end of all of this, Carmen Jones became, the opera that she was in became a worldwide success, and it eventually earned over $10 million at the box office, becoming one of the year's highest earning films at that time. And
that's like 1954 money, right?
Yes.
Damn.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yes. And it ended up, I mean, it's what basically helped her get nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress, which led to her becoming the first Black person to be nominated for a leading role. So groundbreaking. So many I mean, the fact that this like all Black cast had that huge of success in general is so cool. $10 million, $70,000 in the first week. Like, that's just unbelievable. And I think that like her in that role is kind of like what made it so successful, because people were already just like really starting to like her, and she was like known around the world internationally as this like up and coming icon, and that role just sealed the deal. So on the 27th Academy Awards held on March 30th, 1955, Dorothy shared her Oscar nomination with Grace Kelly, Audrey Hepburn, Judy Garland, and Jane Wyman. That's who she was up against.
Wow.
That's who she was up against.
Okay.
Right? So that's why I'm saying, how have I never heard of her?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she didn't win. Of course. But Grace Kelly ended up winning for her performance in The Country Girl. But regardless, Dorothy became an overnight sensation for the fact that she was even nominated and stood alongside those famous white female actresses. So massive. Now, on another Carmen Jones note, one less exciting and less fantastic, while she was filming for this role, she began an affair with the director, who was Otto Preminger, and it lasted 4 years.
Oh, wow.
This guy was also a real dick. And,
no, Dorothy, no, girl, run.
Yeah. And while they were dating, and because he was this like producer, whatever he was like giving her career advice, because of course, why mansplain? I know everything in the industry. You're just this like actress that like you're so lucky you're famous, you know.
I made you. Blah,
exactly.
Blah, blah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
And so he basically told her, like, just like what you said, I've made you this international star. You're blah blah blah. You're amazing. Da da da. You at this point moving forward, you should never accept any role that isn't the leading star role. Like,
no.
Yeah, he's like, you hit the top, you will only take those offers and nothing below ever for the rest of your life.
No.
And she took his advice, and it ended up being like the biggest regret of her career and of her life, because it really backfired down the line. Yeah. Worse, in 1955, she became pregnant with Otto and was forced to have an abortion by the studio.
Oh, no. Yeah, studios back in those days, like, owned you. Like, everything about you. It's awful.
He was also white. Which I don't think helped. And like overall, their interracial romance, as well as like all the other relationships she'd had with other white lovers, was frowned upon by the studio, by her fellow actors and actresses, but particularly by the African American members of the Hollywood filmmaking community. So she had a lot of backlash coming at her for her entire romantic relationship endeavors.
All sides.
So she had her abortion, and then she ended up ending her affair when she realized that Otto had no plans to leave his wife, because of course he had a wife.
Yeah. Why would he?
Exactly. What? So that ended. And then after that, she ended up signing a 3-movie deal with 20th Century Fox, starting in a $75,000 film. So that's a lot of money. Yeah. I mean, $75,000 a film is what she'd be making in 1955. That's so much money.
Yeah, especially then.
Yeah.
Even now, sometimes I'm like, that's a lot. That's a lot of money.
Yes. Yeah. And so Daryl Zanuck, who was, I might be saying that wrong, he was the studio head at the time. He had like personally suggested that the studio sign Dorothy to a contract because he had like big plans for her. He was super excited about her evolving into like Hollywood as this like Black iconic woman on like the big screen, and like he just saw this vision for her. And so he ended up like purchasing the film rights to a movie called The Blue Angel with like every intention to cast her as a saloon singer named Lola Lola. And it was going to be an all black like remake of the original, which was like a 1930s film. Mm-hmm. And he was also planning to star her as had another plan for her as a cigarette girl or something like that in a different show. Mm-hmm. But at this time, she was like still seeing Otto, who was like, oh no, you won't take roles like that because you're just the leading lady.
No.
And you will not you won't be the saloon singer or the cigarette girl. So she turned them down.
No.
She turned them down, and the roles were eventually given to Rita Moreno, a Puerto Rican actress.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Who's also incredibly famous and an icon in Hollywood.
Yep. West Side Story.
But just crazy how she turned these down and they went to, it's just like wild. So yeah, bad advice taken there. Mm-hmm. Not good. And so after her success with Carmen Jones and the fact that she was turning down all these other roles that were being offered, she wasn't getting jobs. And there was also like limited opportunities because of her race. So it sucks because Otto gave her horrible advice and she trusted him and listened to it, and it fucked her up in her career. So thanks, Otto. Then this stupid thing happened in 1957 where she got like mixed up in like a trial over libel. So there was some tabloids were a thing apparently in the 1950s. Who knows when they started? I can't even believe they've been around that long. Tabloids came around and they were invented and started writing like stupid shit about Hollywood actresses, and they wrote something about her. And so she sued this tabloid magazine over a article that they wrote that was ridiculous and out of control and 100% fake, where she apparently was fornicating with a white band leader in the woods of Lake Tahoe.
Okay. What? Jesus Christ. I hate tabloids so much. Just spin a wheel, pick a few things, slap a celebrity's name on it. Like, that is the MO.
Yeah. So she was like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? Like, I will not stand for this. So she testified in like court because they had been writing shit about a lot of women, all sexually related stories, of course. And a bunch of them were like, fuck this. We need to like all go and like challenge this because it's not cool. So yeah, she testified. The reasoning behind her test, like what she had said is just even more atrocious and true, is that there's no way this could have possibly happened because racial segregation at the time had forced her to be locked up in her hotel room, and that if she wasn't performing or like on stage, she wasn't allowed to be like mingling around. Yeah. And so she was required per segregation laws to be alone in her room at all times if she wasn't on the stage performing, and legally it was like mandated, so she'd be like escorted back to her room to be like not seen again until like the next performance. So she's like, there's no way in hell I could have been out in the woods having a holly jolly time with a white band leader. Like, y'all literally wouldn't let me.
May have wanted to, could
right?
It's bad. It's bad either way you slice it. Yeah. Like, it doesn't, there's no good side of any of it. Like, haha, now we've exposed your racism even more than the tablet. Like, what? It's a mess. It's a mess.
It's a lose-lose.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So her claims and all these other women's claims were able to like prove that the tabloid, it was called the Hollywood Research, I think it was called, or maybe it was called the Confidential, I don't remember, but they had committed libel, and so she ended up settling for like $10,000. So that whole stupid scandal was done and over with. And then later that same year, so she actually had like a 3-year absence from acting during this time because like she wasn't getting roles. The trial was happening, just like a lot of things. And so right after that, she accepted another role to star in the production of Porgy and Bess, which would become her first major Hollywood film in 5 years. So wow, 5 years struggling in the industry, and then like landed this. But her acceptance of the role angered the Black community, who felt that the story's negative stereotyping of Black people was degrading. So it's just like, again, it's like she's trying to have like a career and she's trying to do what she loves, and she just like, it's just not working out. Yeah.
There's no winning with it. And then it's also like, what part of your identity are you having to give up in order to do that thing? And like, oh my God.
So around the same time, she marries her second husband. His name's Jack Dennison. This is 1959 now. And once again, he was a raging piece of shit.
No, stop dating.
I know, just cancel men altogether.
For real. Good Lord.
And he was abusive, and he also mishandled her money, which led to Dorothy losing a ton of her savings that went towards Jack's failed restaurant business. What a fucking loser.
God damn it.
Yeah. So they divorced in 1962 amid financial setbacks and allegations of domestic violence. And throughout the divorce, Dorothy also discovers that the people who were handling her finances had been swindling her out of $150,000. And she also owed like $139,000 in like taxes or something. So she was like broke. Like, she was broke.
No.
And she was forced to sell her Hollywood home and move into like some shitty ass apartment in West Hollywood. And this is the worst part. She was forced to put her daughter in a state mental institution because she couldn't afford to pay for her daughter's 24-hour medical care.
No. Oh, no.
What the fuck? Like, I can't even...
That's not going to go well, I'm sure.
Think of anything worse a mother would ever have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Where you don't get to really have a decision in how your child is taken care of.
I can't imagine. So, nothing's going well. The career is failing. She has no money. Her marriage is once again in the shitter, and she's like lost her daughter in a capacity. So she begins drinking heavily and taking antidepressants and not doing well. The threat of bankruptcy and like nagging problems with the IRS was just like looming over her at all times. But it also forced her to get back into like a nightclub career because she had to make money somehow. But once she like got back into the nightclub scene, she just like didn't have the success that she used to have. So it wasn't booming like it had been back in the day. So she like still wasn't really making enough money to like pick her life back up. And then she soon suffered a nervous breakdown.
Oh, no.
Yes. And then on September 8th, 1969, she called her friend who was actually her former sister-in-law from her first husband. I guess they remained friends, Geraldine. And they had some long conversation like that was depressing and like not good. And she was just like talking a lot about like how stressed she was over her career. And there was this like Barbra Streisand role she really wanted to get, and she wasn't like sure about it. And then she like ended the conversation saying like this really cryptic message, quote, "Whatever happens, I know you will understand," to her friend.
No.
Yes. And
no.
Several hours later, Dorothy was found unresponsive in her apartment by her manager, Earl Mills, and it was determined that the cause of death was an accidental overdose of antidepressants.
Oh, no.
And she was 42 years old, and she only had a little bit more than $2 in her bank account at the time of her death.
Good God.
Horrible, right?
That's awful.
That's what I'm saying. Once I got to this part of the research, I was like, are you fucking kidding me? It started off so strong.
Yeah.
Like, ugh.
I mean, it's one of those things, like, unfortunately, just the way that Black women are treated and historically have been treated in this country and in these societies and in the systems, especially like, I think the entertainment industry, like being a part of it, it's sort of always like promotes itself as very inclusive and welcoming and liberal, and to some extent, I guess, but then you hear about the treatment of artists, especially Black women, and it just is absolutely heartbreaking. Oh my God.
Yeah. And like, you know, I always like try to end on quotes. And so I was like looking up quotes about that she had said, like famous quotes that are like, you know, written down in history of things she said. And they were all sad. Like I couldn't find one uplifting quote, because like everything that like her perspective and like her experience and what she understood about herself and her job was so heavily tied into her race and the way that the world perceived her, and that she was always going to be held back and not enough because of that. And I think that alone, in addition to like the horrible men that were abusive towards her, you know, terrible tragedy with her daughter, like all these other traumas she went through. Like, I mean, how much can a person go through? Like, there's only so much emotionally that you can handle. And outside of just the traumas she was dealing with, she also was just trying to navigate a career with like so much against her and all of it out of her control.
Yeah.
So that is her life. And like I said, it went really tragic, and that just like breaks my fucking heart. And there were so many quotes, and like I didn't want to tell them because they're just like, it's just like putting salt in a wound. But I tried to find 3 that were, I thought, good and should be expressed. So the first one was, quote, "Avoid popularity. It has many snares and no real benefit," which I feel like I have to agree with. I mean, I feel like it's kind of like hinting at fame. Like it's not as good as you think it's going to be because it has so many like dark sides to it.
Right. You put it up on a pedestal, but it's not really, you lose a lot with it too.
Yep. And her next quote is, "I was too light to satisfy Negroes, not light enough to secure the screen work, the roles, or the marriage status available to white women." Which is just fucking horrible.
Yeah. Feeling like you don't fit in either place.
Either side. Yeah. And then the last one, which also just kills me, she said, "If I were white, I could capture the world."
Oh.
So yeah, she obviously just was very aware of, like I said, just the one thing that like held her back in her career was the one thing she could never change, and having to like figure out how to like accept that and move past it, hard, like impossible. Like I don't know that you can.
Yeah, it's that thing like of, you know, it's something that's so far out of your control, and it's not even, there's nothing you can do to change it. It's not the thing that is holding you back. It's the thing that people are deciding to use against you. Like they're weaponizing it against you to force you to stay in your place, quote unquote. Like it's, I hope it's getting better. It seems to be getting better. And there's still a lot of conversations and a lot of things that need to change in Hollywood. But when you just feel like there's nothing you can do to move forward.
Wild.
Oof.
I know. Painful. Super painful, but like, you know, Dorothy really did pave a way for a lot of people that have come after her in like so many different realms, like singing, acting, Hollywood. Like she really was kind of like the start of even the people that came after her believing it was possible.
Yeah. And when you have the only people who are trying to help you or guide you are people who don't have your best interest at heart, like Otto and a lot of men in her life, you know, who do you turn to? And
well, I mean, even her mom. The fact that her mom passed her off to this evil bitch who just took her on tour at like 5 years old.
Yeah.
Like that was not good.
When nobody is looking out for you, like it's, and when you're so used to not having somebody care for you, I think you are willing to, you don't know what care looks like. So you wind up in these situations where it's like with Otto or with her first husband, you know, it's, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. But that is Dorothy Dandridge. She was an iconic Hollywood actress, paved the way for so many other Black singers and actresses, and she was standing alongside some of the greatest, most famous Hollywood actresses that we know and hear about every day, and I think it's insane if other people out there have never heard of her, so I hope at least introducing her today and telling her story is a good thing.
Yes,
thing for the world.
It is, and it's needed. Like, it's thank you for sharing her. Like I've heard her name, I've heard about the Dandridge sisters, like, but to hear more of her story and to understand the impact, I think is really, really important, because I think there are a lot of figures that you know of like off the cuff, but then you dig a little bit deeper and you're like, oh wait, hold on, okay, I had no idea. Oh my goodness.
I know. Well, pour one out for your girl Dorothy.
Oh, I will. And have. I've been sipping my drink this entire time, so I'm feeling good.
Good. Well, you are up to the plate.
I am. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited. And also, so we do have some things in common with ours.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the things that we have in common is that both of our ladies have a sad, kind of sad ending. Actually a very sad ending. But again, I think it's important to talk about just the influence that these women have. And so I'm going to do my best to give you as full of a picture as I can. But, so the lady that I'm talking about, well, first of all, okay, I have a question for you.
Yes.
When you think about grunge, the music scene, what do you think of? What comes to mind when you hear grunge music?
I probably am not a good person to answer this because my favorite band is the Grateful Dead. Grunge, I would say, like, I guess I would think of like a form of punk rock. I think of like tight pants, like men with makeup and like wild hair. I don't know that I know that much about grunge.
Okay. No. Well, I'm going to to dive in a little bit. So a lot of times, like grunge, I think people are always like Nirvana, like, you know, Pearl Jam, like bands led by white men from Seattle. Oh, well. The lady that I'm covering today is considered the queen of grunge town, the godmother of grunge, Tina Bell.
Oh, cool. I've never heard of her.
Yeah. So I hadn't either until kind of recently. And there is a reason for it. And I'll get into it a little bit. Actually, a lot of people, including musical historians, hadn't heard of Tina. And it's so upsetting. But we'll get into it.
Yes.
So Tina Marie Bell was born in Seattle, Washington on February 5th, 1957. And she was the eldest of 10 siblings.
Holy smokes.
I know. And there's not a whole, I will say, like, let me preface this. There's not a whole lot about her. I think within the next probably even 6 months to a year, so much more is going to come out about her. And I'll get into the why behind that. But it's really cool to see her story coming to light. So I'll get into more of the whys. So Tina started her singing career at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Seattle. She grew up going to that church with her family and was an active participant in the choir. And that's where she really learned to sing. In the late 70s, she would wind up meeting her future husband and bandmate, Tommy Martin, while she was looking for a French tutor to help her with her pronunciation because she wanted to perform C'est si bon, like Eartha Kitt. So I initially thought when I was doing this research, I was like, oh, I wonder if she's covering Eartha Kitt. So she was looking for somebody to help her like learn how to pronounce some French words. And that's how she met her husband. He was her tutor.
So was he French?
He was not, but he spoke French. Okay. And you know what? Now that I think about it, I'm like, I don't know if he was maybe French Canadian. There wasn't a whole lot on him, but his name was Tommy. And in September of 1979, Tina and Tommy welcomed their first and only son, TJ Martin. And TJ is now like, he's an Oscar winner and an Emmy winner. He's a filmmaker, so he's sort of really come up and he'll be very important later on. So in 1983, Tina and Tommy decided to form Bam Bam, which is their band. The name is an acronym for their surnames, Bell and Martin. It's also a reference to Tommy's childhood nickname because he was always running around causing chaos, much like Bam Bam from the Flintstones.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that was his childhood nickname. So that's where the name for their band came from. In a 2019 interview with the Sonic Mosquito Soup, Tommy explained why he and Tina decided to start a punk band in the first place. Quote, "Punk rock was a natural procession, or should I say a reaction, for a mixed family to embrace. Tina and I were constantly facing adversity and challenges from all directions. People were pushing us to the side, so we figured why not go ahead and take things to the edge ourselves. It was a natural move that just kind of happened naturally," end quote. So, you know, this is late 70s, early 80s, and it's still like very shocking and surprising to see a Black woman married to a white man and they have a child who's mixed race. Even though it's Seattle, which is considered like this liberal mecca, something that Tommy and his and Tina's son TJ will talk about a lot is the deep-rooted racism that is in Seattle and is in the Seattle grunge scene, but nobody wants to talk about it. Like, they just want to be like, no, it's fine. And it's very insidious, and it starts to rear its head further into the career of Bam Bam. So it's rough. Okay, we'll get there. So they decide to start this band, and then they're like, oh, great, we need more band members. So they begin posting flyers looking for a bass player, and that's where Scott Ledgerwood came into the picture. So Scott is he is probably one of the most important figures in preserving the history of Bam Bam and really highlighting Tina's story. So he is just like a fascinating character on his own, but in more recent interviews, you'll see just how much like, and again, we'll get into it, but Scott kind of becomes the champion for helping preserve Tina's legacy, which I think is wonderful. So they're looking for a bass player. They find Scott. They audition him. He just really fits like a glove. And the three of them, all throughout 1983, begin writing music, and they just kept writing nonstop. And then in 1984, they flush out the band with a drummer, Matt Cameron. If you've heard of Matt Cameron, that's because he would later go on to play drums for Soundgarden, and he's been the drummer for Pearl Jam since 1998. Yeah, he's like huge in the grunge scene and in rock and roll.
Was this his first band?
This is not his first band, but it's one of one of the earlier bands that he's part of. And again, I will say both he and Scott are just like wonderful champions for pushing Tina's story to the forefront of rock and roll history. So in I believe it's in 1984, Bam Bam would independently release their very first EP called Villains Also Wear White. This is credited as being the first grunge record recorded at Reciprocal Recording Studio, and that's the same studio where Nirvana would later go on to record their demos for their Bleach and Incesticide albums. So again, Nirvana, like if you think of grunge, like Nirvana is kind of like the golden child.
Totally.
They weren't the first. They were not the first. I think they're probably the band that brought grunge to the forefront. But it's so frustrating to find out years later that it was a Black woman and her band that really created grunge. So in the Seattle scene, Bam Bam was huge. They're considered a precursor to grunge and a major influence, which makes sense. So when Bam Bam would perform, future members of Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and Nirvana would all attend Bam Bam shows. So they're all in the crowd watching this kick-ass, like, female-led band. And you can go on YouTube, and I was listening to, it's called Ground Zero, is I think one of their main music videos. Tina Bell's voice is so sultry and full and resonant and just has so much depth to it, and you can feel the emotion that she's that she's singing about. And I think that becomes so influential in grunge as a whole, that and even just as soon as the chords start playing, like you just listen to that song, you're like, obviously this is when grunge was born. Like you can hear Soundgarden in those chords. Right. And it's, I'm just like, duh, obviously they're the precursor. So you can hear the influence in their sound. There's the muddy sounding guitars, the riffs, the haunting lyrics, everything. It's all there. So aside from Tina Bell's powerhouse vocals, her son, TJ Martin, says that the one thing that really set her apart was her life experience that she brought to the Seattle grunge scene. There is this really wonderful podcast that I listened to called Sound and Vision, and I think it's in episode 144. They do an episode on Tina Bell and Bam Bam, and they interview both Matt and Scott, prior members of Bam Bam. They interview TJ, and I highly recommend it. If you're interested in learning more about Tina Bell, please go listen to it. But one of the things that TJ says about his mom is, quote, "Where my mom is actually living the emotions that they're performing. She doesn't just perform that on stage. When she leaves stage, she's still a Black woman who has to deal with the same fucking shit, maybe even worse than the perception that she's experiencing on stage," end quote. So you listen to a lot of grunge music and there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of turmoil, and not saying that blonde-haired white guys don't experience pain and emotion, but what she was hitting on, TJ says, like, his mom never really talked about race too much. outside of her music, but in her music you can hear it. It's in the lyrics. Like she was really dealing with that need for acceptance, or even like kind of what you were talking about with Dorothy, like never being good enough because of her race. And that is it's deep in the lyrics. And so that was something that TJ talked about a lot, was that, you know, the pain that some performers were doing, it was more of a performance piece, not necessarily always, but it was something they could do and leave on stage.
Yeah.
Versus his mom. Like, she would get off stage and she still had to come back to it.
The same reality she was singing and like speaking about in such like depth and passion was right there waiting for her when she left the stage.
Exactly. There was no taking it off and putting it aside. It's something that she constantly had to wear. In the late 80s, Bam Bam would go on to perform with their grunge counterparts like Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, but they would never reach that same level of recognition. And they were touring with these bands and often opening for these bands, which is wild to me because those members of those bands were in the audience before those bands even formed, watching Bam Bam. And now it's like, it's insane. And so often Bam Bam was being told, like, you guys were better than the headliners. Like, you blew them out of the water. And Bam Bam kept getting these promises of getting to be on the cover of rock and roll magazines. They kept getting promises that they would get signed to a record label, that they would finally get the marketing and the attention that they needed and that they deserved, but it never happened. And for Tina, it was, and Tommy, her husband, and the rest of the band, it was really hard to not sit there and go, this has to be racism. Like, this has to be because our lead singer is Black and she's a woman. Like, what other reason is this like not happening? And so they got really frustrated with these constant empty promises. So they decided in the late 80s that they were going to leave and move to London and see if they could try to make it in the music scene in Europe. And so they left for London. They left for a few years. Unfortunately, they never gained the traction or the recognition in London either. And they were eventually, I think, the very end of the 80s, they were deported back to America. And then in 1990, by 1990, both Scott had left the band and then Matt had left the band as well. Tommy was still part of the band, but in 1990, Tina decided to leave Bam Bam entirely, and she also just quit music altogether. And at this point, she and Tommy had divorced. They were still in a band together, but they wound up divorcing. And at that point, Tina moved and just became... TJ, her son, describes her as kind of becoming a bit of a hermit. She wouldn't really talk about the band. She wouldn't reminisce about music. She didn't want to talk about music. Whereas her dad, like TJ's dad, Tommy, always wanted to talk about the band.
Sorry, really quick. Was he white? I feel like
Yes. Okay. Sorry if that wasn't clear. Yeah. Tommy was white and Tina was Black. And so Tommy was always like reminiscing about creating music, and she just really shut it down and became a recluse. Eventually she would wind up moving to Las Vegas because it felt like that was a way that she could get even further away from everything. She gave up music altogether. She wound up living in like low income housing, where a situation where, you know, whatever you made for the month, you give them 15% and that's your rent. So,
whoa.
Yeah, living in lower income, affordable housing. And basically she was like, I think she became a janitor. Yeah. According to TJ, she became a janitor at the local church and really just like was getting paid cash under the table, and sort of cut herself off. So that was after 1990.
Was her kid like older at this time?
Yeah. So he was born in 1979. So He's early.
Okay, so he's taking
late
care of
teens.
himself. Yeah.
Yeah, and he didn't go into it too much in the interview, but you get the sense that at this point he's living on his own. He's going to college, and so they still talk, but they have kind of grown a little bit separate. Even though she became more reclusive, her and the former bass player Scotty Ledgerwood stayed in touch, and every now and then they would talk to each other on the phone. They would reminisce about touring, and catch up on family life. It got to a point where in around 2010 or so, Scott and Tina started talking about having a comeback for Bam Bam. And the plan was Bam Bam was going to have a comeback. They were going to release a documentary, and TJ, her son, would direct it because he won an Academy Award for Undefeated, which is a film that he created, and he's won a ton of awards for being a documentarian.
Oh, cool.
So that was the plan. And then that they would write a memoir. However, sadly, in 2012, Tina Bell passed away alone in her apartment in Las Vegas at the age of 55.
Oh my God.
It's going to get real bad and real dark. Her cause of death was cirrhosis of the liver. She had struggled with depression and alcoholism later in her life, especially after all of the rejection that she faced in the music scene. TJ said that the coroner estimated that her time of death was actually a couple of weeks before her body was even found.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. When TJ arrived at his mother's apartment in Las Vegas, all of her belongings, except for a DVD player, a poster, and a chair, had all been thrown away.
By who?
By the property manager. So they claimed that all of her personal effects were contaminated because she had died in the apartment and her body had been there for a couple of weeks.
Oh.
So they just threw everything away, including all of her writing, which included lyrics, poems, diaries, along with Bam Bam music and memorabilia, videos, all of it just went into the trash, and her family was never notified. So all of these, and I can't even imagine that, like, as a son or as a child, like, all of these pieces of your mother are just thrown away, and nobody had bothered to reach out to him. And then it still wasn't until like a week later, after the coroner, like she'd been sent to the coroner, that TJ was notified. So he was like 3 weeks before I found out that my mom had passed away.
That's insane. That's so messed up.
And it's 2012. Like, it's not that long ago.
No.
But he even said, she had really become so secluded from everyone that no one had any idea that she wasn't okay.
Wait, so you said what her cause of death was. Mm-hmm. Did she die of like alcohol? What
they
exactly
said that the cause of
that?
death was cirrhosis of the liver, which I believe is like, it's like a slow degenerate disease where your liver essentially just stops functioning. So it stops cleaning out the toxins because it's almost like the liver has become poisoned. And so I believe you wind up dying from blood poisoning because it's not like cleaning anything out anymore. So it's a very slow, painful death.
Was that caused by anything in particular?
Probably like severe alcoholism is generally what causes that. And she had, like, later in her life, started to drink very heavily as a way to cope with the depression.
Totally. Ugh.
Yeah. So, hopefully I'll get us to a slightly, like, I don't know, brighter spot is the right word, but we're gonna get a little rage-inducing right here. But so, like, for decades, Bam Bam's music and Tina Bell's legacy has been basically wiped out from all public records. So there's a really famous book by Mark Yarm called Everybody Loves Our Town, An Oral History of Grunge. And like, I looked this book up. I haven't read it, but I looked it up. It's got like 5 stars. Everybody's like, this is the best history of grunge music you could ever ask for, blah, blah, blah. They do talk about Bam Bam, and there are a lot of documentaries, books, articles on the history of grunge that never mention Bam Bam. This book does. However, Tina is never mentioned. So she did leave the band in 1990, and Bam Bam would continue on past that. But the remaining members would just continue on as an instrumental trio. And I think they then wound up forming like a new band that released lyrics, but they were just an instrumental trio for a couple of years after she left.
Was Tommy still in it?
So Tommy was still in it as the lead guitarist, and then there were 2 other members. At this point, both Scott and Matt had left on for other projects. So Tommy was the only remaining member. Mm-hmm. And the thing with it is, like, even though the band continued after 1990, it's no excuse to cut out one of the founding members, especially since Bam Bam existed for over 7 years with Tina Bell at the helm. She was the lead vocalist, and she was the primary lyricist. So
were they still performing her songs?
I don't think they were performing her songs. I think when she left, they went fully instrumental.
Oh, got it. Yes, you can say that. Okay.
But that's still the thing of like the influence that she had was on bands that already existed before 1990. So her influence started in the mid 80s, but they just like completely wiped her from that book. But what started to happen in more recent years is that there are a lot of journalists and music historians and fellow musicians who've started to give Tina back her voice. There's one musician in particular. Her name is Jahari. She is a Black female singer, also from Seattle, who was a teenager when Tina was the lead singer of Bam Bam. Like, she grew up watching Tina Bell and was inspired by her, and has influenced so many young Black musicians today. But the thing that is known for is she is the lead singer of an all-female AC/DC cover band called Hell's Bells, which I believe they perform in LA every now and then.
I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah. But so people like Jahari, Scott from Bam Bam, and Matt Cameron from Soundgarden and Bam Bam, those are 3 like big names that have really pushed to keep Tina's story in the public discourse and are fighting harder than ever to make sure that people know who she is. And there are a lot of music historians and journalists who are using their platform to make sure that people know who she is. And it's wild because I think you start to see a lot more articles in like 2019 and 2020 and 2021 talking about Tina.
Oh, I just looked up a picture of her.
Yeah, she's like, here's the thing. She was like 5'2" and just so fierce. You can watch Ground Zero's a great one if you really want to hear her vocals, but there are some videos of her performing live, and you watch her and she just has this like presence.
Yeah.
Where she's so fucking cool, and you're like, this is what all of those guys wanted to be.
Right.
And you can see she was heavily influenced by The Doors, by Jim Morrison of The Doors, Metallica, and David Bowie. And you can see and even hear like the David Bowie swagger.
I'm like kind of getting like fun. Tina Turner vibes with the hair.
Yeah. So she was compared to Tina Turner a lot.
She?
And she did like look up to Tina Turner, and Tina Turner was one of her, and Aretha Franklin was another one. Who are like her vocal inspirations, but she was often compared to Tina Turner, which that you mentioned, funny that you mentioned that. So TJ, her son, actually did a documentary, I think it's called Tina, on Tina Turner.
How funny.
So life comes a little bit full circle.
Always.
Yeah. But so she's definitely getting more attention now, which it's so frustrating that it didn't happen sooner. Because for such a long time, she was sort of written out of grunge's history. And again, one of the like biggest advocates for her is the former bass player of Bam Bam, Scott Ledgerwood. He's worked tirelessly to preserve Bam Bam's history. He has a website where you can actually go through and see like all of the times Bam Bam was ever mentioned in the news. Like he's created this online archive. And he is specifically in a lot of interviews that I was reading and listening to, he acknowledges that deep-rooted racism and misogyny are likely the main factors why people have tried to erase Tina's influence from the history of the grunge scene. And it's a very long quote, but I was like, this is such a perfect summary of like who Tina was. So there's a really wonderful interview with both Scott and Tommy talking about Bam Bam. That was from, I think, 2019. And it's from the Sonic Mosquito Soup, which is the name of the media outlet. Highly recommend. But this is a quote from Scott. And it says, quote, "I recall Tina being called the N-word more than once. In San Francisco, on stage in Seattle. Man, in Seattle, she grabbed the mic stand and with all of her 90-odd pounds, she swirled it around her head 2 to 3 times for centrifugal assistance and smashed both of these skinhead wanks in the front row. She fucking nailed them. The first one took the brunt of it and went down. The other caught the final of her swing and just right on the nose. Splat. Tina stormed off humiliated and fucking furious. Tommy dove into the fray with his guitar still strapped on, but the crowd was already clearing out those guys. That was a fucked up moment to say the least. It took a while for Tina to calm down enough to come back and finish the show. It enrages me to this day. Some people had trouble accepting a black girl who didn't conform to their expectations. They'd be more comfortable if she were a soul diva or hip-hop singer rather than a hard rocker. But Tina Bell was pure rocker spirit, man. I've never known anyone who lived the rock ethos as genuine as she did. She breathed music. It defined her. It was her life." End quote.
That's so sweet. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, horrible that happened and she was so devastated by it. But, like,
Yeah.
it's so sweet to hear them, like, recognize her, and you can just tell how much they really admired her and loved her and are probably themselves pissed. Like,
Yeah.
just the bullshit of it all.
Yeah, that's something, again, that Sound and Vision podcast, there's a bit with Matt Cameron, and he talks about that. Like, you know, it was hard. He basically says, I think it's, yeah, he like says something to the effect of like, it was hard knowing that we were worth so much and people just would not let us get the recognition that we deserved because of misogyny and racism, like baseline. And it sucked because like Tina, again, like go watch those YouTube videos of her. She just, I think she's that idea of like a rock and roll star that people want. She's so cool. She's so fucking cool. And the power that she has and her voice is amazing. And people were threatened by that. Amjahari talks about that, like being at shows as a teenager and watching the other bands basically shoot daggers with their eyes at Tina because they were so jealous of her. She was like, the jealousy just radiated off of people. And she was like, and you know, it was this weird thing because most people like loved it. Like the crowd would eat it up and they were huge fans, but every now and then you would just see these people that were so threatened by her. Mm-hmm. And instead of just like uplifting her and being excited for her, they were just jealous. And it's so shitty. But so Tina Bell, the godmother of grunge.
Oh, I love it. I have like so many thoughts. Like, one, if she was living right now, she would be an absolute famous, loved, just
Right?
like she would be booming if Like the woman that I'm looking at right now, I could just see her on a stage today and just the crowds would be filled.
Yeah, it's like there's some photos of her, just the way she would do her hair and makeup. I was like, people are still trying to like capture that same look, that same edge, and it doesn't feel like she was faking it. Like she just was that, like what Scott said, like she breathed music. She was rock and roll.
I feel like you said it perfectly, or I don't know if this was something that was a quote from somebody else in the band, but like probably this annoyance from the grunge community when they saw her and how hard she was like killing it in this like genre, and thinking to themselves like, one, she's better than everybody, two, she's like doing new innovative things and like doing it well, but like three, like who do you think you are doing this in this space, and who do you think you are doing it as well as you're doing it in this space? You deserve, you belong in like the blues, the R&B, the whatever it is. Like don't come in here in our world and fuck shit up when it's not your world.
Yeah, there's in that Sound and Vision podcast, so like the first half is the interview with Scotty, Matt, and TJ, and then the second half is really fascinating. They've put together a round table of Black musicians who are currently in Seattle, and they're all from like the rock and grunge and punk scene, and I didn't look up their ages, but they're probably about our age, like in their 20s to 30s. And they talk about how they will, whenever somebody writes an article about their band, they'll often write like, oh, soul singer, or like they will get described as anything but what they are, which is rock and roll or punk or grunge. They're like, no, I'm not a soul singer. I'm a rock and roll singer. Like, what are you doing? Like, they're still getting mislabeled because people still don't want to allow Black musicians into those spaces, which is wild. Like, if you haven't studied music history, hate to break it to you, but rock and roll would not exist without Black musicians. Country would not exist without Black musicians. Like, most music in its form today, and even, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, all of it would not exist in any of those forms without the influence of Black musicians, just period. And yet they are consistently erased from it. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. Like, what?
Okay, so one thing I'm just like wondering though, like about this grunge scene, like, and about Seattle during this time period, I guess I'm just like confused because Bam Bam was like doing well. They were a big hit. Like all these other bands were in the crowds watching them, cheering them on. Like it was like moving forward and they were like getting their name out there, and then it just like stopped and everybody else kind of kept rising while they stayed.
Yeah.
I think I'm just like wondering though, like, was their inability to like progress on a larger scale due to the audience, due to the environment of Seattle, due to like studio labels, record labels?
Yes.
Like, what was it?
Yeah. So Scott talks about that, and he's like, honestly, he's like, I think audiences would have eaten us up. Like, they would have loved us, but the people in power, the people in the suits, did not want to see a band with a little Black girl at the forefront. And then that's sort of like what happened with, they kept getting these promises of, oh, you'll be on the cover of this magazine. Oh, we'll sign you to this record label. Oh, we'll give you this, we'll give you this, we'll give you this. And it just never happened. So they never got the financial backing that some of these other bands got. They never got the momentum, and their name never got out there really outside of the Seattle scene. And so while they were doing really well in Seattle, and I would say even along the West Coast, there was never that And he, like, that push forward. And like with Tina, she just got so disheartened by it and felt like she was fighting a losing battle, which is part of the reason why she quit the band. And, you know, they attempted, like, okay, screw it. Like, America's not going to support us. Let's go to London and see if we can make it happen there. And it was kind of more of the same. So I think at that point, you know, sort of like with Dorothy, she couldn't change the thing that was holding her back, or that people were using against her to hold her back. And so she just walked away from it completely. Like, I think TJ said, you know, his mom would still listen to her records. She would still play music, but she never really sang again. She never performed again. Like, she, as a musician, completely walked away from it. And
that's so sad.
Yeah, and just, like, gave up on it because the thing that she loved more than anything, just, like, that industry and that world just wouldn't love her back.
Jeez. What a fucking...
Yeah.
Why does the world have to be so evil?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wish I knew.
And, like, what's so frustrating about that is that, like, we're looking at two women who were very talented.
Yeah.
Hardworking, like, made actual real impacts on the audiences who saw them and loved them. Like, they had a positive reaction from the public, and yet they were still held back by, like, the structure of it all, the system of it all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you still see that today, right? Like Black Panther. I think so many people were waiting for that film to fail, and then it wound up being the fastest grossing Marvel film. Like, it destroyed box office records because that's what people wanted. And then it was like studios were surprised. They were like, oh, what? And it's like, yeah, like, people have been wanting an all-black superhero film for years. Same with Wonder Woman, right? Like, people want those things. They want they want that representation. They want to be able to engage with media that tells those stories. But a lot of the people in power who have the money to say yes or no are generally white men. So, you know, like,
they're like, we'll just make a 25th Batman.
Yeah, let's just remake Batman again. Am I going to go see it? Yes, because Rob Pattinson is the kind of chaotic energy that I'm here for. But yeah, like, let's just keep remaking the same shit, which is why I, like, love social media. I think it's the bane of my existence. But that's something that I do love, is, like, you get to have those conversations. And, you know, now that, you know, you could take an iPhone and iMovie and shoot a film, like, you can get content out there. You can engage with it. Not saying that it's still not difficult, especially for people of color and, you know, marginalized communities, but it's easier to find your community and to reach other people and to share those stories. But I think, you know, yeah.
Oh, man.
I know. It was so heavy. I was like, this will be fun. And
they're
like,
both
no,
heavy.
Story is sad.
I know. They're
so sorry,
both
listeners.
were heavy and sad.
But also, like, there's stories about two women who really helped revolutionize the fields that they were in. But again, they just get swept away. And so I do think, you know, it's important that we talk about them too.
Totally. And acknowledge those things as, like, fucked up and horrible and sad as they are. It is true and it's real and it exists then and now. And it exists in the time period that Dorothy was trying to make a name for herself. Same with Tina. Same with people today.
Yeah. But I think, okay, here's what I will say. Like, because it's fucked up. But I think it is important that we go looking for those stories, right? Go find those stories, because I promise you, Tina and Dorothy are not the only women out there. Find those stories, engage in those stories, like, share those stories, because the more that people know, like, that those voices and that those people existed and have come before them, the more you can go like, no, I am capable of doing this. The more that it can inspire future generations. So both stories are incredibly tragic, but I think it's important to find those stories and to hear those stories, and to share them.
Oh, well, high five to these ladies.
Go, if you got Spotify, go listen to Bam Bam. There's a little playlist there. Yeah, like, go. You can still appreciate the art that they made. So go engage in it. Go listen to it. Get pumped up. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Fuck
Dope women.
Yes. Fuck yes. Fuck yes to women's stories. Fuck yes to Black History Month. There's so many women, men, women, everybody that have done some really great things. And I'm happy that we got to talk about 2 of those stories today.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for
fun.
bringing Tina. We haven't had a grunge queen yet. That is so cool. I freaking love it.
I know. Also, like, her outfits, I was like, hello, how do I do this?
Everything about
her
her
makeup. So rad.
So happy you came on the show. It was so great. Loved learning about Tina. You did such a great job.
Thank you.
And yeah, cheers to just fucking celebrating women's lives.
Cheers.
Thank you guys so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have been enjoying the show and you want to help support me and the podcast, please be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, and also subscribe to the show so that you can receive brand new episodes straight to your phone the moment that they drop. And if you want to be a real MVP, please be sure to swing over to Spotify. They recently rolled out reviews for podcasts, and I would so appreciate it if you could take a little bit extra time today to leave us a 5-star rating on the Spotify app. We are slowly building our ratings over there on that platform, and I could really use the extra help to boost us out in the Spotify world. Thank you again so much for listening, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.